Rebecca Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she checked the atmospheric readings for the third time that night. The numbers looked good, but she always double-checked everything because Carl Johnson, her supervisor, would blame her if anything went wrong. She had been working the night shift at Luna Mining Colony Station, 7 for 3 years now, and she knew the routine by heart. The processing center hummed quietly around her as the massive machines cleaned and recycled the air for 8,000 people living on the moon. Rebecca liked the night shift because it was peaceful and she could think without anyone bothering her. During the day, the place was full of engineers and technicians shouting orders and complaining about broken equipment. She lived in HabPod 247, which was barely big enough for a bed and a small desk. The walls were gray metal and the only window showed the black space outside with Earth hanging in the distance like a blue marble. Rebecca had applied for a bigger room twice, but the waiting list was 5 years long. She did not mind too much because she spent most of her time working anyway. Every month she sent half her paycheck back to Detroit, where her mother lived in a care facility. The medical bills were expensive, but Rebecca could not imagine leaving her mother alone. Her father had died in a factory accident when Rebecca was 15, and her mother was all the family she had left. When she was not working, Rebecca read books from the colony library. She liked old stories about heroes and adventures, but sometimes they made her feel sad because her own life was so ordinary. She had never traveled anywhere except from Earth to the moon, and she had never done anything important or exciting. The other workers were friendly enough, but Rebecca did not have close friends. She was the person who covered extra shifts when someone was sick and who never complained about overtime. Carl barely spoke to her except to give her new assignments. The other technicians called her Mouse because she was quiet and tried to stay out of trouble. Lately, Rebecca had been having strange dreams that worried her. In the dreams, she saw geometric patterns that moved and shifted like living things. Sometimes she heard voices speaking in languages she had never heard before. The voices sounded urgent, like they were trying to tell her something important, but she could never understand the words. She had thought about seeing the colony doctor, but the dreams did not hurt, and they only happened when she was sleeping. The colony medical staff was overworked, and Rebecca did not want to waste their time with something that was probably just stress from too much overtime tonight. Felt different, though. Rebecca could not shake the feeling that something was about to change. She had been restless all week, and the dreams were getting stronger. Last night she had seen the patterns so clearly that she tried to draw them on paper. When she woke up, but her hands could not recreate what her mind had seen. The communications panel beeped, and Rebecca looked at the incoming message. It was a routine update from Earth Command about shipping schedules and colony supply requests. Nothing unusual, but as she read the report, she noticed something that made her pause. There were mentions of unusual readings from the outer system monitoring stations, and several scout ships had missed their scheduled check-ins. Rebecca frowned and pulled up the detailed reports. The missing ships were all from different sectors, but they had one thing in common. They had all been investigating strange energy signatures detected near the edge of human space. The energy patterns described in the report sounded familiar, but Rebecca could not remember where she had seen them before. She was about to file the reports when the emergency alert system activated. Red lights flashed throughout the processing center, and a recorded voice announced that all personnel should report to emergency stations. Rebecca had been through dozens of emergency drills, but this time the announcement repeated 3 times, which meant it was not a drill. Rebecca ran to the nearest communication station and activated the colony-wide channel. Carl Johnson's voice crackled through the speakers, and he sounded scared. Unknown ships had appeared in the outer system, and they were not responding to human communication attempts. The ships were moving toward the inner planets, and their design was unlike anything humans had ever seen. As Rebecca listened to the reports, she felt a strange, tingling sensation in her hands. The geometric patterns from her dreams suddenly flashed in her mind, and she gasped as she recognized them. They were the same energy signatures that the scout ships had been investigating before they disappeared. The colony shook as something large passed overhead. Through the window, Rebecca could see sleek alien vessels moving through space with impossible grace. Their hulls seemed to shift and change color as they moved, and they left trails of energy that hurt to look at directly. Rebecca stared at the ships and felt something awakening inside her mind. The voices from her dreams were getting louder and clearer. For the first time, she could almost understand what they were trying to say. The geometric patterns were not random shapes, but some kind of language or code that was trying to activate something. Deep in her genetic structure, one of the alien ships stopped directly above the colony, and a beam of light scanned the surface. Rebecca felt the beam pass through the walls and over her body like it was looking for something specific. When the light touched her, she heard the voice clearly for the first time, speaking in perfect English. The inheritor has been found. The war chooses you, Rebecca Martinez. Rebecca fell to her knees as knowledge that was not her own flooded into her mind. She saw flashes of ancient civilizations and cosmic wars that had raged across the galaxy millions of years ago. She saw the truth about humanity's place in the universe, and the destiny that had been waiting for her since the day she was born. The quiet mining worker who had never wanted to be special was about to become something that would change the fate of every living being in the galaxy. The alien ships opened fire without warning, and Rebecca watched in horror as energy beams tore through the colony's outer hull. Emergency sirens wailed as atmosphere rushed out through the breaches and people screamed over the communication channels. Rebecca tried to stand, but her legs felt weak as the strange knowledge continued flooding into her mind. She stumbled toward the emergency shelter, but stopped when she saw one of the alien fighters heading straight for the processing center. The ship's weapons charged with a sound like thunder, and Rebecca knew she was about to die. Time seemed to slow down as the energy bolt raced toward her, and without thinking she raised her hand. A barrier of pure light appeared in front of Rebecca, and the alien weapon struck it harmlessly. The energy dispersed in all directions, leaving scorch marks on the walls, but Rebecca was completely unharmed. She stared at her hand in shock, not understanding what had just happened. The alien fighter immediately changed course and retreated from the colony. Rebecca could hear frantic radio chatter in a language she had never heard before, but somehow she understood every word. The pilot was reporting that the target had been found and that human weapons were more advanced than expected. Dr. Amanda Foster burst into the processing center carrying a medical scanner and breathing heavily. She was the colony's chief scientist and one of the few people who had ever been kind to Rebecca. Amanda stopped when she saw the scorch marks around Rebecca, and the expression on her face changed from concern to amazement. Amanda had been studying the energy readings from Rebecca's location, and the scanner in her hands was showing impossible results. Rebecca's cellular structure was changing at the molecular level, and she was emitting energy signatures that matched the patterns detected from ancient ruins scattered across the galaxy. Amanda helped Rebecca to a chair and began running detailed scans while explaining what she knew. For 20 years, human archaeologists had been finding ruins on dead worlds throughout known space. The ruins belonged to a race called the Architects, who had vanished millions of years ago, leaving behind only fragments of their incredible technology. The Architects had been fighting a war against an enemy called the Calyx Empire when they disappeared. Human scientists had always assumed the Architects lost and were wiped out, but Amanda had been studying genetic samples from the ruins, and she had made a shocking discovery. The Architects had seeded the galaxy with genetic triggers hidden in the DNA of primitive species. They were waiting for one of those species to evolve enough to inherit their weapons and continue the fight. Humanity was that species, and Rebecca was the first person to carry the complete genetic sequence needed to access Architect technology. Rebecca tried to process this information, but her mind felt like it was splitting apart. Ancient memories that belonged to someone else were mixing with her own thoughts, and she could see things that had happened before humans even existed. She saw the Calyx Empire spreading across the galaxy like a plague, destroying everything. In their path, the voice in her head belonged to an architect named Viridian, who had sacrificed himself to create the genetic triggers. He was trying to teach Rebecca how to use the weapons and abilities that were awakening inside her, but the process was overwhelming her human brain. Rebecca stood up and felt power flowing through her body like electricity. She could see energy patterns invisible to normal eyes, and she could sense the alien ships moving through space around the colony. The Calyx had declared humanity a primary threat, and they were calling for reinforcements to destroy Earth before more humans could awaken to their architect heritage. Amanda led Rebecca through the colony corridors toward a secure laboratory where they could study what was happening to her. Along the way, they passed windows showing the battle raging outside. Human defense ships were trying to fight the aliens, but their weapons were having little effect against the Calyx energy shields. Rebecca watched a human cruiser explode and felt rage building inside her. These were her people being killed by an enemy that had been hunting them across time and space. The architect memories showed her how to project her power through technology, and she reached out with her mind toward the human ships. Every human weapon in the system suddenly blazed with new energy as Rebecca's power flowed through them. Calyx shields that had seemed impenetrable began failing under the enhanced assault, and 3 alien ships exploded in brilliant flashes of light. The remaining Calyx vessels immediately retreated, but Rebecca could sense them broadcasting emergency signals. The Empire would send everything they had to destroy humanity before the Architect legacy could fully awaken. Rebecca realized she was no longer just a mining technician trying to pay her mother's medical bills. She was humanity's weapon in a cosmic war that had been waiting millions of years to resume, and the enemy was already on their way. The knowledge flooding through her mind showed her glimpses of the future, and what she saw terrified her. The Calyx Empire controlled thousands of worlds, and their fleets numbered in the millions. Humanity had perhaps a few hundred ships, and most of them were cargo vessels or mining platforms. Earth's military had been designed to fight human conflicts, not an alien empire that could manipulate space and time itself. The only advantage humans had was Rebecca and others like her who might awaken to the Architect legacy, but there was a cost to using these powers. Rebecca could feel her human cells burning out from the energy flowing through them. Each time she accessed Architect knowledge, she lost a little more of herself. Her childhood memories were already becoming fuzzy, and she was starting to forget what her mother looked like. Amanda ran more scans and confirmed Rebecca's fears. The transformation was killing her slowly but steadily. At the current rate, she might have months before her human biology completely failed. They needed to find a way to slow the process or find others who could share the burden. The communication system activated, and a message came through from Earth Command. Admiral Stone wanted Rebecca brought to Earth immediately for study and training. The government had decided that she was too valuable to risk, and they wanted to turn her into a controllable weapon. Rebecca felt the Architect knowledge stirring in her mind, and she knew that following orders would doom humanity. The Empire was already moving, and there was no time for bureaucracy or politics. She had to make a choice between being the weapon others wanted her to be or becoming something else entirely. She looked at Amanda and made her decision. They would not go to Earth, and they would not follow orders from people who saw her as just another piece of military equipment. Rebecca was going to find the other potential inheritors and teach them to fight back before the Calyx could complete their genocide. The war had chosen Rebecca, but now she was going to choose how to fight it on her own terms. General Patricia Stone arrived at Luna Colony 3 days after the attack with a full military escort and orders to take Rebecca into custody. She was a decorated veteran with gray hair and cold eyes who had spent 30 years fighting pirates and rebels in the outer colonies. To her, Rebecca was not a person but a strategic asset that needed to be controlled. Rebecca sat in the colony's medical bay, feeling the Architect knowledge burning through her mind like acid. Every hour brought new memories of ancient wars and weapons that could reshape reality itself. She could barely remember her old life working in the atmospheric processing center, and sometimes she forgot her own name for minutes at a time. Dr. Amanda Foster tried to protect Rebecca from the military officials who wanted to run tests and experiments. Amanda had become the closest thing Rebecca had to a friend, and she was horrified by how quickly the transformation was destroying Rebecca's humanity. The scans showed that Rebecca's brain activity was changing and her DNA was rewriting itself. At the cellular level, Captain Lisa Brooks was different from the other military officers. She was younger than Stone, with kind eyes, and she seemed to understand that Rebecca was still a person underneath the cosmic power. Lisa had grown up on a mining station similar to Luna Colony, and she recognized the look of someone who had been forgotten by the system. Lisa convinced Stone to let her work with Rebecca instead of just studying her like a laboratory specimen. She helped Rebecca practice controlling her abilities in a way that preserved as much of her original personality as possible. They started with simple exercises like moving objects with her mind and projecting energy shields. Rebecca discovered that she could phase between dimensions for short periods, making herself completely untouchable. She could also see through the barriers between realities and observe things happening in distant parts of the galaxy. The Calyx Empire was mobilizing massive fleets and heading toward human space, but they would need months to reach Earth. During one training session, Rebecca sensed something wrong and phased into the dimensional space between worlds. 3 Calyx assassins had infiltrated the colony using shape-shifting technology that made them look human. They were hunting Rebecca with weapons designed to disrupt architect energy patterns. The assassins attacked during a meeting between Rebecca and the military command staff. They moved faster than normal humans, and their weapons fired bolts of energy that could phase through normal matter. General Stone tried to fight back, but her conventional weapons were useless against the alien infiltrators. Rebecca emerged from dimensional space behind the first assassin and grabbed him with her bare hands. The architect power flowing through her body disrupted his shape-shifting technology and revealed his true form. He was a tall creature with silver skin and too many joints in his arms and legs. The second assassin fired at Rebecca, but she projected a barrier that not only blocked the shot but reflected it back at the attacker. The energy bolt struck the alien in the chest, and he dissolved into particles of light. The third assassin tried to retreat, but Rebecca reached into dimensional space and pulled him back before he could escape. Lisa watched in amazement and horror as Rebecca interrogated the surviving assassin using methods that seemed to come from somewhere else entirely. The creature revealed that the Calyx had sent hundreds of infiltration teams to eliminate potential architect inheritors before they could awaken to their full power. Rebecca realized that she was not the only human with the genetic markers. The architect knowledge showed her 12 other people scattered across the colonies who carried the same potential. Most of them were ordinary people living quiet lives with no idea of what they could become. The military wanted to locate these people and bring them to Earth for training, but Rebecca knew that would take too long. The Calyx fleets would arrive before the new inheritors could learn to use their abilities effectively. She needed to find them herself and awaken their powers while there was still time. General Stone refused to let Rebecca leave the colony without military escort. She argued that Rebecca was too valuable to risk and that the government needed to control how the architect legacy was used. Stone had visions of turning the inheritors into super soldiers who would follow orders and fight Earth's enemies. Rebecca felt the ancient knowledge stirring in her mind, and she saw flashes of what the architects had really been. They were not the noble defenders she had first believed, but conquerors who had seeded the galaxy with genetic triggers to create slave armies. Every species they had uplifted had eventually been consumed by the power and lost their original identity. The Calyx had fought the architects not as invaders but as liberators trying to free the enslaved races. Rebecca realized that both sides of the ancient war had been wrong and that she had a chance to choose a different path. She could use the architect power to protect humanity without becoming a tyrant or a weapon. Lisa began to understand what Rebecca was planning, and she offered to help. She had seen enough of military politics to know that the government would use the inheritors as tools and throw them away when they were no longer useful. Lisa believed that Rebecca deserved the chance to make her own choices about how to use her abilities. Rebecca made her decision during a strategy meeting with the military command. She stood up and told General Stone that she would not be going to Earth and she would not follow orders from people who saw her as property. The architect power flowed through her voice, and everyone in the room felt the weight of cosmic authority behind her words. Stone tried to order her security team to restrain Rebecca, but the soldiers found themselves unable to move. Rebecca had learned to project her will into other minds, and she was not using the ability to control but to communicate. She wanted them to understand that she was fighting for them, not against them. Rebecca walked out of the colony with Lisa beside her, and no one tried to stop them. She had discovered that she could sense the location of the other potential inheritors by following the energy signatures in their DNA. The nearest one was on Mars, working as a cargo pilot and completely unaware of what was about to happen to her. As they boarded a small transport ship, Rebecca felt the burden of her choices settling on her shoulders. She was abandoning the safety of military protection and the guidance of experts who understood the technology better than she did. But she was also choosing to remain human for as long as possible. The war had chosen Rebecca, but she was determined to choose how humanity would fight back. She would find the other inheritors and teach them to use their power without losing themselves. Together they would face the Calyx Empire not as weapons, but as people defending their right to exist. 6 months after first contact, the Calyx main fleet arrived at the edge of Earth's solar system like a storm of silver death. 3,000 warships emerged from dimensional space in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with energy that made space itself ripple and bend. Earth's combined naval forces numbered barely 200 vessels, and most of them were cargo ships hastily fitted with weapons. Rebecca stood on the bridge of the battleship New Horizon, watching the enemy fleet through the view screen. She had found 8 of the 12 potential inheritors and awakened their abilities, but the process was killing all of them faster than expected. Each time they used architect power, their human biology burned a little more, and Rebecca could see the exhaustion in their faces. Commander Jake Sullivan was a career Navy officer who had volunteered to work with the inheritors, despite orders from Earth Command to avoid them. He understood that conventional weapons would be useless against Calyx technology, and humanity's only hope lay with Rebecca and her team. The other inheritors were ordinary people who had been living normal lives until Rebecca found them. There was Maria Santos, a cargo pilot from Mars who could manipulate gravity fields, and Danny Clark, a factory worker from Europa who could phase matter through solid objects. Each of them struggled with the same problem Rebecca faced, watching their humanity slip away as alien knowledge filled their minds. Rebecca had learned to project her abilities through human technology, turning ordinary ships into vessels capable of interdimensional travel and reality manipulation. She connected her mind to the New Horizons weapon systems and felt the ship's capabilities expand beyond anything its designers had imagined. The Calyx fleet began its advance toward Earth, and Rebecca made her choice. She ordered the human ships to follow her lead and phase-shifted the entire task force into dimensional space, where they could move faster than light and attack from unexpected angles. The battle for Earth's moon became the turning point of the war. Rebecca emerged from dimensional space inside the Calyx formation and began disabling enemy ships by overloading their power cores from within. She could exist partially outside normal spacetime, making her nearly impossible to target or hit. Maria used her gravity manipulation to crush Calyx fighters, while Danny phased human torpedoes through enemy shields to strike their hulls directly. The other inheritors worked together in ways that seemed impossible, coordinating their attacks across multiple dimensions simultaneously, but the victory came at a terrible cost. Rebecca felt her human memories fading faster with each use of her abilities, and she could see the same thing happening to the others. Danny collapsed during the battle as his nervous system finally failed, and Maria began speaking in languages that belonged to dead civilizations. During the fighting, Rebecca encountered a Calyx commander named Vexmiral who was different from the others. Instead of attacking her, he tried to communicate, and what he told her changed everything she thought she knew about the war. The architects had not been noble defenders fighting against evil invaders. They had been conquerors who seeded the galaxy with genetic triggers to create slave soldiers for their empire. Every species they uplifted eventually lost their original identity and became extensions of architect will. The Calyx had fought them not as aggressors but as liberators, trying to free the enslaved races from architect control. When the architects realized they were losing, they had hidden their genetic triggers in primitive species, hoping that one day their slaves would awaken and continue the conquest. Vexmiral showed Rebecca visions of worlds that had fallen to architect control as she saw the truth about what she was becoming. The knowledge burning through her mind was not just information, but a form of mental conquest designed to replace her personality with architect programming. Rebecca realized that both sides of the ancient war had been trapped in a cycle of violence and revenge that had consumed the galaxy for millions of years. The Calyx Empire had become as controlling and oppressive as the architects they had defeated because war had taught them that only power mattered. She faced a choice between following the architect programming and becoming a weapon of conquest, or finding a new path that neither side had ever considered. The easy choice was to embrace the power fully and lead humanity to victory through dominance and control. Instead, Rebecca chose something the galaxy had never seen before. She reached out to both human and Calyx minds simultaneously and showed them the truth about their manipulated history. The war was not about good versus evil, but about breaking free from cycles of violence that had been programmed into both. Specius Thexmiral was a philosopher warrior who had always questioned his empire's methods, and he recognized the wisdom in Rebecca's approach. Together they began planning something unprecedented, a joint operation to end the war not through victory, but through revolution against those who had started it. The plan would require Rebecca to make the ultimate sacrifice. She would have to fully embrace the architect transformation, losing her human identity forever to gain enough power to expose the truth to both species. Simultaneously, Rebecca looked at her reflection in the ship's window and saw that her eyes were already changing color as the alien knowledge rewrote her genetic structure. She had perhaps days before the transformation was complete, and she became something that was no longer human commander. Sullivan tried to convince her to find another way, but Rebecca knew there was no time. The Calyx reinforcements were arriving, and Earth's defenses were failing. If she waited any longer, both species would be locked in a war of extinction that would consume the galaxy. She gathered her team of inheritors and explained what she had learned about their true purpose. Some of them were angry and felt betrayed, but others understood that they had a chance to choose their own destiny instead of following ancient programming. Rebecca made her final decision as the battle raged around them. She would use the architect Tawa not to conquer, but to liberate both species from the lies that had shaped their history. The quiet mining worker who had never wanted to be special was about to become something that would change the nature of war itself. The transformation began as Rebecca opened her mind fully to the architect knowledge and felt her human identity dissolving into something vast and terrible and necessary. Rebecca's body was failing and everyone could see it. Her skin had taken on a silver sheen that matched the energy patterns flowing beneath the surface, and her eyes had changed from brown to a brilliant blue that hurt to look at directly. Dr. Amanda Foster estimated that Rebecca had weeks to live, but the war showed no signs of ending. The other inheritors were dying too. Maria Santos had collapsed during the last battle, and her body was shutting down as the alien knowledge burned through her nervous system. Danny Clark could barely speak anymore because the architect language was replacing his ability to form human words. Commander Sullivan watched helplessly as the people he had come to care about sacrificed their humanity for a war they had never chosen to fight. The Calyx Empire had called in reinforcements from across their domain, and massive fleets were converging on human space from every direction. Rebecca discovered that she was not the only one trying to resist the architect programming. Deep in space, she found signals from other inheritors who had awakened on distant worlds. 12 humans scattered across the galaxy were all fighting the same battle against the alien knowledge that threatened to consume their identities. Lieutenant Colonel Ben Hayes coordinated the new psionics unit as they struck at Calyx command ships and supply lines. Ben was a veteran officer who had lost his entire family in the first Calyx attack, and he understood what it meant to sacrifice everything for a cause. The inheritors worked together across impossible distances, using their connection to the architect network to coordinate attacks in multiple star systems simultaneously. They could phase through space-time and appear anywhere in the galaxy within moments, but each jump cost them more of their remaining humanity. Rebecca realized that military victory was not enough to end the conflict. The cycle of war and revenge that had consumed the galaxy for millions of years would continue unless someone found a way to break it permanently. Both species were trapped in patterns of thinking that made peace impossible against orders from Earth. Command Rebecca initiated contact with Calyx civilians on occupied worlds. She discovered that most ordinary Calyx citizens knew nothing about their government's true purpose or the ancient history that had started the war. The Calyx people believed they were fighting a defensive war against human aggression because their leaders had manipulated information for generations. They had no idea that their empire had become as oppressive as the architects they had originally fought to defeat. Rebecca found that she could communicate directly with Calyx minds. Using her dimensional abilities, and what she learned horrified her. The empire's ruling caste had been using the war to maintain their power by keeping their people afraid and dependent on military protection working. With X-Miral and a growing group of Calyx rebels, Rebecca began planning something that had never been attempted before. They would expose the truth to both species simultaneously and start revolutions that would overthrow the leaders who had perpetuated the conflict. The plan required precise timing and enormous risk. Rebecca would have to connect to every communication network in both human and Calyx space and broadcast the true history directly into billions of minds at once, but the effort would require her to fully embrace the architect transformation and become something that was no longer human in any meaningful sense. She would gain the power needed to reach across the galaxy, but lose everything that made her Rebecca Martinez. Amanda tried desperately to find another way, but the scans showed that Rebecca's human brain tissue was already being replaced by crystalline structures that could process information at quantum speeds. The transformation was accelerating, and soon it would be irreversible. Rebecca spent her final days as a human recording messages for the people she cared about. She told her mother that she loved her, and she thanked Amanda for being the friend she had never had before. She asked Commander Sullivan to make sure that humanity remembered what it meant to choose compassion over conquest. The hardest conversation was with Lisa Brooks, who had become like a sister to Rebecca during their time together. Lisa begged her to find another way, but Rebecca knew there was no time left. The Calyx reinforcements were already engaging human defenses, and Earth itself was under direct threat. Rebecca gathered the surviving inheritors for one final mission. They would infiltrate the Calyx command structure and gather the evidence needed to expose the Shadow Council, the ancient beings who had been manipulating both species from behind the scenes. The Shadow Council had been harvesting the psychic energy released by dying civilizations for millions of years, using war as a tool to generate the suffering they fed on. They had manipulated the architects into creating the genetic triggers, and they had corrupted the Calyx Empire to ensure the cycle of violence continued. Danny Clark died during the infiltration mission as his body finally gave out, but not before. He transmitted crucial data about the Shadow Council's location. Maria Santos lasted long enough to help Rebecca access the quantum realm where thoughts became reality and the true enemy could be confronted. Rebecca felt her human consciousness fragmenting as the architect knowledge completed its takeover of her mind. She could feel herself becoming something vast and cold and alien, but she held on to one last piece of her original identity, the memory of her mother's face and the promise she had made to protect humanity. The transformation was nearly complete when Rebecca made her final choice as a human being. She would not become another architect weapon or allow the Shadow Council to continue their cosmic manipulation. Instead, she would become something entirely new, a bridge between species that carried both the power to change the galaxy and the wisdom to choose a better path than endless war. Rebecca Martinez, the quiet mining worker who had paid her mother's medical bills and read adventure stories in her spare time, was about to become something that had never existed before in the long, bloody history of the galaxy. She would become hope itself. The final battle took place in the quantum realm, where reality bent to the will of consciousness and thoughts became weapons that could reshape existence itself. Rebecca no longer had a physical body, but existed as pure energy flowing through the dimensional barriers that separated different levels of reality. She found the Shadow Council in their hidden fortress at the center of the galaxy where they had been manipulating civilizations for eons. They were ancient beings that had transcended physical form long ago and fed on the psychic energy released by war and suffering across the cosmos. The Council had orchestrated every major conflict in galactic history, including the war between the Architects and the Calyx Empire. They had manipulated both sides into creating weapons and genetic triggers that would ensure the cycle of violence continued forever, providing them with an endless supply of the energy they needed to survive. Rebecca confronted the Council's leader, a being of pure malevolence that had forgotten its original form and existed only to consume the pain of others. It showed her visions of the future where humanity and the Calyx would destroy each other, completely leaving the galaxy empty except for the Council's hunger. The Shadow Council tried to corrupt Rebecca as they had corrupted countless others before her. They offered her power beyond imagination and promised that she could rule the galaxy if she accepted their guidance and continued the war, but Rebecca was no longer the ordinary mining worker who had started this journey. She had become something new that combined human compassion with architect knowledge and Calyx wisdom. She was neither conqueror nor slave, but a bridge between all the species that had been manipulated by the Council, using her connection to both the inherited knowledge and her human memories. Rebecca broadcast the truth directly into the minds of every sentient being in the galaxy. She showed them the real history of their conflicts and revealed how they had all been pawns in the Council's cosmic game. The revelation sparked simultaneous uprisings across hundreds of worlds as billions of beings realized they had been fighting wars based on lies and manipulation. The Calyx Empire collapsed as its citizens turned against their corrupt leaders and demanded an end to the pointless violence on Earth and the human colonies. People saw the truth about the Architect legacy and chose to use their technology for exploration and healing rather than conquest. The genetic triggers that had been designed to create weapons instead awakened abilities that could bring different species together. Rebecca's consciousness expanded beyond anything that could be called human as she fought the Shadow Council in the quantum realm. The battle raged across multiple dimensions simultaneously as reality itself became the battlefield between freedom and eternal manipulation. The Council fought desperately to maintain their control, but they had grown weak over the millennia by feeding on suffering instead of creating anything positive. Rebecca's power came from connection and hope rather than domination, and it proved stronger than their ancient malevolence. One by one, the Shadow Council members were destroyed as Rebecca unraveled the quantum structures that had kept them alive for millions of years. Their fortress collapsed, and the psychic networks they had used to manipulate civilizations dissolved into harmless energy. Rebecca's physical form dissolved completely in the final effort, but her consciousness survived, distributed across the galaxy's communication networks. She had become something unprecedented, a digital guardian who could watch over the emerging peace without controlling it. In the aftermath of the revelation, Captain Lisa Brooks established the Galactic Liberation Council, bringing together humans, former Calyx citizens, and dozens of other species that had been freed from Shadow Council manipulation. They worked together to heal the damage caused by millions of years of artificial conflict. Myral became the first Calyx ambassador to Earth and helped establish new colonies where different species could live and work together. The technology that had been designed for war was transformed into tools for exploration and scientific advancement. Commander Sullivan founded a new organization dedicated to helping species recover from the trauma of manipulation and war. He made sure that Rebecca's story was preserved and taught to children across the galaxy so they would understand the price of freedom. Dr. Amanda Foster continued her research into architect technology, but focused on medical applications that could heal the genetic damage caused by the ancient weapons. She established treatment centers for the surviving inheritors and helped them maintain their humanity while using their abilities constructively. The galaxy began to change in ways that no one had imagined possible. Species that had been enemies for millennia discovered they had more in common than they had differences. Trade routes opened between former battlefields, and explorers set out to map regions of space that had been forbidden for eons. Rebecca's consciousness watched over this transformation from her place in the galactic network. She could communicate with people across vast distances and offer guidance when they asked for it, but she never imposed her will on others. She had learned that true strength came not from the power to control, but from the wisdom to let others choose their own paths. The ordinary mining worker who had never wanted to be special had become something greater than any weapon. Rebecca Martinez had been chosen by war, but she had chosen something better than victory. She had chosen understanding, compassion, and the belief that every being in the galaxy deserved the chance to determine their own destiny. Years passed, and children across hundreds of worlds learned about the quiet woman who had saved them all, not through superior firepower or tactical brilliance, but through the simple human conviction that peace was worth any sacrifice. The war had chosen Rebecca, but in the end, she had chosen hope over hatred, connection over conquest, and the future over the past. She had proven that even the most ordinary person could change the fate of the galaxy when they refused to accept that conflict was inevitable. In the depths of space where the Shadow Council's fortress had once stood, a memorial was built to honor all those who had died in the manipulated wars. At its center was a simple inscription that Rebecca had chosen herself. She was ordinary until the war chose her, but she remained human until the very end.